first time I saw my father again after all those years, the storm did not come from the sky. It rose from the marble floor under my heels. I stood at the threshold of his dining room in a tailored coat that didn't belong to the girl he once told to suffer. My hair pinned back, my voice steady enough to slice bone. The chandelier trembled in the draft when I pushed the door wider with my palm, and every head at the long table swung toward me. My brother with his permanent smirk turned brittle. My sister gripping a wine glass like it might anchor her against the tide. And at the head, the man who taught me that love had a ledger. Debit for obedience, credit for usefulness, and a line item of contempt where my name used to be. He blinked as if the light were wrong. "You," he said. "Not my name, never my name." And in the full hush of their home, I smiled a rehearsed smile and laid a slim folder on the tablecloth, its edges aligned with ruthless care. "I thought you'd like to see what ownership looks like," I said, then let the moment breathe until it hurt. Their eyes crawled over the papers, and I watched recognition bloom like a bruise. The deeds, the debts, the signatures that bent the house itself to my will. My father's face sagged, not from age, but from a new gravity he didn't understand. I leaned in, close enough for him to smell the rain still clinging to my coat. "Years ago," I whispered, "I asked for help. You said let her suffer. She deserves nothing. I learned, Father. I learned how to survive without you." His knuckles whitened on the armrests, and for an instant I thought he might rise, rage at me the way he used to. Thunder poured into the shape of a man, but the thunder did not come. I took back my folder, turned my back on the stunned tableau, and walked away, heels clicking the sentence I'd waited years to speak. I did not say it out loud. Not yet. I wanted them to wonder. I wanted them to remember. The door closed with a polite click, and the story rewound, as if the sound were a spool spinning backward to the night that taught me what hunger could build. That night, the roof above my room leaked in 9 separate places, 9 tiny mouths gulping rain, each drip a needle in a clock I couldn't afford to own. The house had always been tired, as if my mother's death years before had stripped it of color and given it a permanent bruise, but storms made it mean. Wind jabbed the windows. Water crept along the ceiling in slow gray veins, and the floor under my thin mattress had learned every shape of my bones. I had propped a bucket under the worst leak and wedged a bowl beside it. And because the thunder was loud and shame is louder, I tried to fix the roof myself. Climbing the crooked attic ladder with a coil of plastic sheeting I'd scavenged from behind the grocery store. The attic air tasted of dust and old mice. I crawled across beams like a contraband ghost. When the sheeting slipped and cold rain slapped my neck, I swore I wouldn't cry. Crying in that house was like dropping coins into a well, noise that promised nothing back. It was after midnight when I clambered down, soaked and shaking, and the bowl had overflowed, and the bucket had filled, and the water had found new places to fall. My chest felt tight, like my ribs had been cinched with wire. I wiped my face on my sleeve, stared at the damp walls, and thought of my mother's photo tucked under my pillow. Her smile in that picture had hope left in it, the kind that assumed effort would be noticed. I tried to borrow that hope, like using a key I no longer owned. The hallway outside my room smelled like polish and old anger. I counted steps to my father's door because counting kept me from hearing my own fear. He'd always told me to handle things myself, that asking for help proved you didn't deserve it. But I had run out of ways to keep the ceiling off my head. And water is patient. It wears you down drop by drop until even pride becomes a sieve. I knocked softly, no answer. I knocked again, louder. The door swung open just enough for the lamplight to sketch my father's outline. Shoulders squared under a cotton robe, jaw shadowed, eyes taking inventory rather than seeing. Behind him, my brother lounged against the dresser, phone in hand, grin dialed up for an audience. My sister perched on the bed's edge, painting her nails a red that felt like a dare. "What?" my father said. The word a pin meant to pop me. "The roof," I managed. "It's leaking badly. I tried to fix it, but please, I need help." Silence. Then a faint chuckle from my brother, who had never worked for anything heavier than a gym mirror. My father's mouth tightened. "You need help," he repeated, as if reciting a line he'd written for me. "You always need, don't you? Always a mouth open, hands out. Your mother spoiled you. Look at you, soaked, pathetic. Who taught you to be helpless? Heat rose under my wet skin, an animal heat, humiliating and bright. "I've been working," I said quietly. "I pay for my food. I fix what I can. But the rain." "The rain," he said, head tilting in mock thoughtfulness. "And what would you have me do about the weather?" My sister laughed, a small knife of sound. "Maybe buy her an umbrella for her room," my brother said, and the two of them snickered like children rehearsing cruelty for a school play. I thought of turning away. I thought of pride, the broken clock of it, how it told the wrong time, but you kept checking it because habit is a sort of faith. Instead, I made myself stand straighter. "Father," I said, the word catching on old invisible thorns. "I am asking. Please." He looked at me as if I were a number on a bill. He had always kept the accounts in our house, always balanced them to the penny, always made sure the math favored two of his children and starved the third. He was not a monster in the way stories like to make monsters. No fist raised, no slamming cabinet doors, no dramatic tantrums to be filmed by neighbors. His cruelty was administrative. He pruned, he allocated. He audited affection, deducted grace. "Let her suffer," he said then, almost gently. "She deserves nothing." I tried to swallow the words down, but they didn't fit. They lodged in me like a fishbone. Behind him, my brother whooped softly, like the scene had hit its mark. My sister's smile was a red crescent on the pale plate of her face. The door closed. The latch clicked. Clicks were very different in this house. Some meant welcome, some meant finality. This one meant finality. I walked back to my room with my arms tucked around myself, as if I could hold in what was trying to spill out. Water plinked a steady metronome in the bowl. I dumped it into the bucket, dumped the bucket into the hallway bathroom sink, carried it back, started again. The night stretched. When exhaustion finally pinned my eyelids, I slept in a chair because the mattress was too damp and hope was too thin to lie down on. In the morning, I woke with a stiff neck and a new rule written under my ribs. Ask no one. I don't know when determination becomes a habit. Only that it does. And once it does, it looks a lot like stubbornness to people who never had to learn it. I took extra shifts at the bakery where the ovens breathed out a tired heat like old dogs. The manager had a voice that came out in sighs and called everyone kiddo. Flour dusted my hair white and settled into my shoes, and at night my feet mutinied with blisters. On weekends, I scrubbed office floors where the lights stayed on too bright, as if the building refused to distinguish between day and night. In the afternoons, I studied at the public library because the air smelled like paper and patience, and because no one there asked me to prove I was worth the chair I sat in. I taught myself to fix what I owned: patch drywall, reseal windows, quiet rattling pipes that stuttered like frightened birds. On good days, the house returned my effort with temporary silence. On bad days, the wind found new ways to speak. People say time heals, but time doesn't heal anything if the wound is how you live. What it does, if you let it, is make your scar smarter. I learned which voices to ignore. I learned that kindness, when it showed up in small and ordinary ways. A bus driver who waited those extra 3 seconds. A customer who said thank you, like he meant it, could keep you alive in increments. But I also learned I was invisible to the people under my own roof. My father began to talk around me the way you talk around a chair you plan to throw away later. "Your sister's got talent," he'd say at dinner, eyes shining at her description of a fashion course she might take if someone else paid for it. "Your brother's got fire," he'd say when my brother boasted about a fight at the gym. Then his glance would pass over me like a shadow forgetting to darken. I stopped trying to earn that look. I stopped asking why. That winter, when the cold found its way into the hollows of my joints and sat there like unwelcome company, I took a night class the bakery manager told me about. A community program where small business owners taught practical skills: inventory, budgeting, how to look a supplier in the eye and not blink first. The instructor was an old man with hands as knotted as roots and a habit of pausing before he spoke, as if words were coins and he meant not to overspend. He watched the class the way a carpenter eyes a wall he intends to hang a heavy shelf on, measuring for hidden studs. After the second week, he stopped me at the door. "You keep your notes like they might run away," he said. "You're hungry?" The word made me flinch. "I am," I admitted. "Good," he said, and handed me a long column of numbers. "Hunger is a tool. Learn where to point it. I did. He let me help at his warehouse on Saturdays, where I learned the muscle memory of forms and freight, learned how to fold a pallet wrap without tearing it, how to tell a good shipment from a bad one by the breadth of the boxes. He paid me in cash and practice. It wasn't glamorous. It was building a skeleton I could hang my life on. At home, nothing softened. My father raised his eyebrows when I left early or came home late, but his interest only sharpened when he thought I was failing. "Don't embarrass us," he'd say, which meant, "Don't make me answer for you." My sister took to borrowing my sweaters and returning them with perfume ghosts that turned the knit sour. My brother began to leave weights in the hallway like traps. Once I tripped and bruised my shin so purple it looked like something trapped under ice. When I caught his eye over dinner, he smiled the way boys smile when they have learned their father's language. The one where hurt is a ledger, and they've discovered how to keep it balanced in their favor. I moved out of my room and into the attic that spring, not because it was better, the roof still remembered how to leak, but because distance can be a kind of mercy, even if it's only one flight of stairs. I built a bed from old pallets and a thrifted mattress. I stapled plastic over the rafters and learned the difference between a drip you could live with and a drip that would ruin you. I put my mother's photo on the beam above my pillow, the one stable line in a crooked space. I talked to her when thunder made the house tense. I told her about the class, the warehouse, the sense that somewhere beyond this house was a version of me that had room to breathe. If there was an answer, it lived in the way the attic air warmed slowly in the morning sun. The night it all pivoted was almost a year after the roof and the door and the sentence that lodged like a splinter. I came home late from the warehouse with split fingertips and a head full of numbers that suddenly made sense, and my father was waiting in the kitchen with a paper laid out flat like a crime scene. "Your contribution," he said, tapping the bill. "Rent, utilities, food." The sum at the bottom could have paid for the bakery's entire month of coffee. "I already buy my own food," I said evenly. "I pay my own bus fare. I fix the house when it breaks." "You fix nothing," he said. "You make messes that cost me. If you want to live under my roof..." He let the phrase hang, pleased with its authority. Under my roof, under. "But this is more than the mortgage," I said quietly. "And you didn't ask them to pay." I gestured toward the hallway where my siblings had paused, suddenly absorbed in their phones, eavesdropping with all the subtlety of cats. "They contribute in other ways," he said. "Your sister brings pride to this family. Your brother has fire." I finished for him and felt something in me unhook. "I understand." I folded the paper. "When do you want it?" "First of the month," he said, satisfied. I smiled then, and it must have looked wrong on my face, because my sister frowned like she'd heard an off note. "You'll have it," I told him. Then I went upstairs, sat on my pallet bed, and took out the notepad where I kept my lists. Bills, hours, supplies, possibilities. I added a new column, exit. I found a room to rent within walking distance of the library, a sad little studio over a shop that sold replacement parts for things most people didn't bother replacing anymore. The landlord spoke in monosyllables and took cash. The ceiling sloped like a shrug. I stood in the center of the floor with my bag and felt the strange relief of air that belonged to me. Only me, even if it smelled like dust and old receipts. I moved in the next day. I left my father the folded money on the kitchen table because promises are for me, not for him. He didn't call. He didn't visit. My siblings messaged once each. My brother with a screenshot of a flexing arm, like he'd won something. My sister with a photo of a party I wasn't invited to and the caption, "Oops." It hurt. But familiarity is not the same as love. Familiarity just remembers your name. It doesn't keep you warm. In the studio, I learned the alchemy of sleep when the only person who could wake you to belittle you wasn't there. I learned what my laughter sounded like when no one measured it for usefulness. I doubled my hours at the warehouse. And when my instructor turned boss asked why, I said, "Because I want out of the shallow end." And he nodded once. Like that was the right answer on a test. Only he knew the questions too. We drew up a plan. Not for a miracle, just for momentum. Start with micro-distribution. Seasonal items the big companies ignored. Neighborhoods the big companies didn't know how to talk to. I saved until the number in my notebook had a comma. I learned to negotiate like a tide. Steady, inevitable, shaping stone. And on a bright morning years later, I stood at the threshold of my father's dining room, folder in hand, the storm I once carried inside me now harnessed into weather I could set, and understood that the girl who was told to suffer had not only survived, she had studied every cruelty until it spelled instruction. I did not speak the sentence I'd been saving that day. There was time for that later. The first chapter of revenge is not thunder. It is the quiet decision to stop asking for shelter from people who prefer you wet. Years slipped by like shadows across a wall, each one heavy with the echoes of my father's words. But instead of crushing me, they hardened something inside me, turning my grief into iron and my humiliation into fuel. Because I refused to let the memory of that night, the storm dripping through the ceiling, his voice saying I deserved nothing, define my ending. I worked every job I could find, jobs my siblings would wrinkle their noses at, jobs they mocked when they spotted me in stained uniforms. I scrubbed restaurant floors until my knees ached, washed dishes until my hands cracked, carried boxes until my back screamed, and though every coin I earned was small and every shift humiliating, I saved and scraped and starved, because I had decided that no one would ever again have the power to watch me beg. The world outside my father's house was merciless, but at least its cruelty was honest. If I worked, I ate. If I hustled, I survived. And that truth was fairer than the twisted ledger of favoritism and disdain inside those four walls. For a long time, my life was little more than exhaustion and grit. But one day, opportunity walked into my life disguised as an old business owner, with eyes that could read desperation like scripture. He watched me stack crates in his shop one afternoon and asked why a girl with fire in her step wasted herself on scraps. And though I had no answer except survival, he must have seen the hunger in me. Because he offered mentorship, not pity, and that single act cracked open a door I had thought forever sealed. Under his guidance, I studied, learned numbers like they were weapons, learned negotiation like it was combat, and learned that success was not gifted. It was carved, often with bleeding hands. My rise was not sudden, but brick by brick I built a foundation my family could not even imagine. I took on risks they would never dare, made sacrifices they were too comfortable to stomach, and little by little, I stopped being the forgotten daughter and became a woman who moved with quiet authority. All the while, my siblings remained nestled under my father's shadow, his praise feeding their egos but never their skills, his shallow approval blinding them to the slow decay of their own futures. They lived as though comfort was permanent, as though inheritance was guaranteed, and they laughed whenever my name was mentioned, convinced I had disappeared into mediocrity. They didn't know that every insult, every dismissal, every night I lay awake with hunger clawing at my stomach, was shaping me into someone they could no longer reach, someone they would one day regret casting aside. My reputation began to spread, first in whispers among merchants, then in small columns in business reports, and finally in headlines that even my father's arrogant circle could not ignore. The girl they had left to drown in the storm had become a woman with her own growing empire. I saw their names once on a debt list, my brother's reckless ventures collapsing and my sister's vanity choking her in loans, and though a part of me still felt the old sting of abandonment, another part, stronger, colder, smiled, because it was proof that arrogance without work is just a slow form of rot. For years I had dreamed of returning not as a beggar but as a storm in flesh, and now the time was drawing near. My suffering was over. The lesson my father once spat at me had reversed itself. It was not I who deserved nothing, it was them. Their turn was coming, and I intended to make sure they remembered every word they had once thrown at me when the weight of justice finally settled on their shoulders. The house that once imprisoned my childhood stood hunched and weary against the afternoon sun, its windows dull, its roof sagging as though the weight of years and unpaid debts had finally bent it into submission. I stepped out of the car in silence, the gravel crunching under my heels louder than thunder in the stale air, and for the first time in my life, I did not look at that house with fear or shame. I looked at it as an owner inspecting a property, as a conqueror standing before fallen ruins. The front door creaked when I pushed it open, and the scent of dust and wilted pride greeted me like an old adversary. Inside, the same walls that once echoed with laughter at my expense now bore the stains of neglect, their paint peeling in long strips like old bandages. At the dining table sat my family, the very people who had branded me worthless, who had let me drown in my own suffering, who had spoken the words that haunted me through every sleepless night. My brother's smirk faltered when he saw me. My sister froze mid-gesture, her wineglass trembling in her manicured hand. At the head of the table, my father, older and diminished, tried to sit taller, but his eyes betrayed the crack in his armor. "You," my brother spat, his voice sharp but shaky. "How dare you come back here?" I walked closer, the sound of my steps deliberate, controlled, a rhythm of authority they could not ignore. My smile was thin, cold, and deliberate. "How dare I? That's rich coming from you. This house, this land, even the very chair you sit on, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to me." I slid a folder onto the table, its contents spilling just enough for their eyes to catch the stamps, the signatures, the evidence of purchase. "While you mocked me, while you left me to starve, I built everything you thought I'd never have. And when the banks came knocking for the debts you couldn't pay, I was there to collect. I bought it all, this house, your lands, even your dignity." My sister gasped, color draining from her face. My brother leaned forward, fists clenched, but the bravado he once wore like armor was gone. He was a man out of his depth, drowning in disbelief. My father's face twisted, rage flaring like a dying flame. "You ungrateful child," he hissed, his voice hoarse with the effort of authority. But I would not let him rewrite the story. "No," I cut in sharply, my tone like steel scraping against stone. "Ungrateful would have been if I had bowed and begged for scraps after everything you did. Do you remember? The night I asked for help, the night the roof caved and the storm broke through. Do you remember what you said, Father?" The silence was suffocating, broken only by the shallow rhythm of his breath. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. So I said it for him, letting the venom drip from each word. "You told me, let her suffer. She deserves nothing." Those words carved me hollow, but in that emptiness I built fire. I learned to survive without you, without this family. And now look at you, all of you, small, desperate, sitting in a house you no longer own. My siblings exchanged glances, but neither dared to speak. I could see it in their eyes, the recognition, the regret, the bitter taste of the tables turning. My father gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles blanched, but the fight in him was nothing more than smoke. "What do you want from us?" he finally asked, the defiance in his voice trembling against the weight of his fear. I leaned in just enough for him to see the reflection of his own arrogance mirrored in my eyes. "Nothing. I wanted nothing then, and I want nothing now. That's the beauty of it. I don't need you anymore. You made me believe I deserved nothing, and now that is exactly what I've come to give you. Nothing." I stood tall, collected the folder, and turned away, my heels striking the wooden floor with finality. Behind me, the silence thickened into despair, the same despair they had once left me in. At the door, I paused, allowing myself one final glance at the crumbling empire they thought eternal. My father sagged deeper into his chair, my brother's fists loosened in defeat, and my sister's eyes glistened with unshed tears. For a moment I almost pitied them, but pity is a currency they had long ago refused me. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me with a soft, deliberate click, and whispered into the wind the words that had burned in my chest for years. "Let them suffer. They deserve nothing,